All right. I welcome you all, to this lecture, and thank you very much for joining me. Today, we are going to talk about the seminal text written by Matthew Arnold, and the title of the text is The Study of Poetry. It's a very famous one, and it has established his renown, or we can say it has established his reputation as a critic. So we'll be reading some of the issues from here. Those were said to be very important. Now, in the very first paragraph of our today's handout, it says that McFarland, the greatest name among the Victorian critics, was a poet turned critic. We know that McFarland is famous as a poet because we have read some of his poems in, under the banner of Victorian age or Victorian era. So now we're going to talk about him, or we're going to discuss about McFarland as a critic. He started his literary career by writing poetry. It was only at the age of 31 that he published his first piece of criticism, preface to the poems. So you see, when he was 31, he wrote his first literary critic, or piece of criticism, and the title of that writing was Preface to the Poems. And for the rest of his life, he wrote many of the criticisms, and he established his career as a critic after writing that one when he was, at the age of 31. And his literary criticisms, broadly, we can divide them into two categories. The first one, as you can see, the theoretical criticism or literary aesthetics. And the second one is practical criticism. So the theoretical and practical, these two types of criticism actually were written by McFarland. His theoretical criticism is contained largely in his preface to the poems and the function of criticism at the present time. Starting at the head of the first series of his essays in criticism, and the study of poetry, with which opens the second series of his essays in the preface. So his practical criticism largely consists of his estimates of English and continental poets contained in both the series of essays in criticism. So you see, his practical criticism, it started with the study of poetry. The text actually we are reading in this semester. And in his practical criticism, especially actually he actually criticized the quality of the writing of the English writers, the poets and other writers, and also the continental poets. So that actually established him as a practical critique. And he was influenced by a number of facts. That means he established his, his reputation as a critic. And for this reputation, or for his inspiration of being a critic, he was influenced by several facts. The first fact was his father. He was very much influenced by his father, and he learned Greek and Latin from his father because his father knew Greek and Latin. And also he was inspired by the classical literature by his father. And the second fact, he was very much influenced, that was his time. The time actually he was living in, the Victorian age. Because he was disgusted with the degenerate and decadent romanticism of the day, its moon worship, false money values, its cultural anarchy, its historicism, its provincialism, and its Philistinism. So he was very critical of all these trends that actually he could see at that time. And also he was, in support of the Cultural Revolution. At that time, actually, it was going on in England. So the first thing, actually, he was very much critical of the Romanticism, the Romantic era. That's why actually he criticized it in his criticism, in his writing. And also at that time, people, the Victorian era, lots of industrial revolution was going on there, and different other kinds of scientific experiments and geographical discoveries were also going on there at that time. So as a result, what happened that people became very much materialist. So they were, very much after money and wealth and their personal development. So he was very disgusted by this kind of attitude of people. And also money was valued in the society, and he considered that value as something which is false. And he was also disgusted by this. He disliked it. And the cultural anarchy that was created by all this, He was also very much skeptical of that kind of cultural development and anarchy. And also, he was disgusted by that kind of chaos that was going on at the Victorian era. So this also helped him, or you can say this also stimulated him to be a critic. And also, another very important reason that actually he wanted to be a critic, that is his reading. He was an avid reader and he read lots of things, from ancient literature or Greek literature to the literature that was existing in his time. So he read, most of the important works by all those classical writers, and he got influenced by all those things. So he was influenced by the Greek and Roman literature. So that also encouraged him to be a critic. And another thing which is very important, that actually he used to teach at the Oxford University. And, since actually he was in the Oxford, so it helped him to establish his ideas, because since you're an academician and you have a platform like Oxford University, so definitely you can have your voice and you can criticize works. So that also gave him a platform to be a critic. That helped him a lot. Now, I will go to page 3 of our handout. There, actually, we will start the discussion about the text, the study of poetry. And as you can see, he starts his discussion by, asserting that the future of the poetry is immense. That means he started his, his text by praising poetry, and also, he expected something huge, a good future that was coming, or a good future for the poetry. Because he thinks that all our religious belief and our creeds and our faiths, they were decaying in that sense. So that's why he thought that, or he believed that the poetry can save us. So, and he is saying that in poetry, actually, we can express ourselves. Now, also he's saying that the strongest part of a religion today is unconscious poetry. We should study poetry more and more, for poetry is capable of higher uses. So he thinks that poetry, we can use it for the higher purpose. We have to turn to poetry to interpret life for us. That's his exact quotation from his text, that we should turn to poetry, so that poetry can help us to interpret our life. And also poetry will console us, and it will sustain us. It will help us to sustain in the life. It will give us the support so that we can sustain in the practical life, because lots of chaos and anarchy is going on in the outside world. So poetry is you can say that is the solace, or you can say poetry is a result for the people. So without poetry, science will remain incomplete, and much that passes with us for reading and philosophy will be replaced by poetry. So he's saying that science will remain incomplete if there is no poetry. And also, he's saying that the philosophy in future and also the religion, it will be replaced by poetry. So you see, he was very much ambitious about the future of the poetry. So poetry can fulfill its high function only if we keep a high standard for it. No charlatanism should be allowed to enter poetry. So you see, he's saying that we have to maintain high standard, while actually we want to talk about, or if we want to write poetry. And at the same time, there will be nothing like fake. It must not be something which is fake, or you can say something pretentious must not be there in the poetry. It must be very genuine. That's why he's saying that no charlatanism should be allowed to enter poetry. Now, as Arnold says in his text, a criticism of life under the conditions fixed for that criticism by the laws of poetic truth and poetic beauty. So you see, he is talking about poetic truth and poetic beauty, because poetic truth is something which is universal. If you can recall, we'll also talk about it later. It will come later, the poetic truth and also and the poetic beauty. But just to remind you of that, while actually we were reading Aristotle's Poetics, you see there actually he talked about poetic truth and historical truth. Do you remember that? Poetic truth and historical truth. He talked about it in his Poetics.
Yes,
okay, so Aristotle, when he talked about, Aristotle, when he talked about poetic truth, he said that poetic truth that will deal with the universal, things that is universal, that is common to the people. For example, the human emotion, human life. So all these are the truth. These are the universal fact. And that is the matter of the poetic truth. On the other hand, historical truth is just something like the fact, the chronology, only the events that are recorded in the history, and that is historical truth. But historical truth is not applicable for all because it is very much time bound. But on the other hand, poetic truth, that is not time bound. It is something which is universal, something which is infinite. Do you understand what I'm saying? So Arnold actually, he is in support of poetic truth and poetic beauty. We should have this in poetry. So only the best poetry is capable of performing this task. That means only in the best poetry we can find the poetic truth and poetic beauty. So only that poetry, which is the criticism of life, can be our support and stay when other helps fail us. So it is important that readers should learn to choose the best. So, and in choosing the best, the readers are warned against two kinds of fallacious judgments. So you see, if we really try to sustain with the help of the poetry, then we must take care of two kinds of fallacious judgments, because we must not be influenced by these kind of judgments. Otherwise, we'll not be able to get good poetry or the poetic truth and poetic beauty, therefore. So what are those two, those two fallacious judgments? One is the historic estimate, and another one is personal estimate. Now, the historic estimate, as he says, that historic estimate is, when you try to consider the ancient poets and you always try to consider them that they are the best, and then the contemporary poets you don't care about. Sometimes if they don't match with those criteria, then you say that they are not good poets. So this kind of historical judgment or historical estimate we shouldn't have, that only the antiquity or only the ancient things are the better, and contemporary things are not, they are not well qualified to call them classic. So we should not be biased in that way. So that is historic estimate. On the other hand, personal estimate, that all of us actually, we have our own personal opinion. We have our own feelings, we have our own education, we have our own background. But Matthew Arnold, he says that in this text, that we must not be affected by those personal feelings or emotions while actually judging or criticizing any piece of work, especially poetry. Because if you bring your personal emotion and personal ideas to criticize the work, then you will lose the integrity of the work. The work should be judged as it is in itself. Neither the historic estimate, that means based on the historical evidence, you cannot compare or judge any work, and at the same time you cannot use your own personal feelings and emotion to judge a particular work. Because if you bring your personal emotion, your personal likings to judge any particular work, then you become partial, and at the same time you use something which is very much exaggerating. You use the hyperbole to explain that particular work or to praise that particular poet. So that's why he's saying that we should be aware about these two historic estimate and also the personal estimate. Now, next, we will jump to, if you go to page 5, please go to page 5. So you can see on this screen on page 5, it says that poetry is superior to all knowledge. So we have already seen that he has started he started being very much ambitious about the future of poetry. Now, he also talked about the superiority of poetry. It's above all the knowledge. There he says that the study of poetry is Arnold's most famous work of literary criticism, as it is fundamentally concerned with poetry's high destiny. That means the future of the poetry. He is of the view that poetry can be our sustenance and stay in an era where religious beliefs are fast losing their hold, as we have already talked about it. So Arnold lived in a materialistic world where advancement of science had led society in a strange darkness. So you see, the religion actually, it was fading, or it was losing its effect on the society, on the people, and at the same time, because of the scientific advancement, people became very much materialistic. So these were actually creating a kind of chaos in the society. So in this kind of situation, poetry can help us to sustain or to survive. The importance of religion was submerged. People were becoming fact seekers. A gap was being developed, and he believed that poetry could fill that gap by noble and profound application of ideas to life, which should be of moral nature. Therefore, he believes that with the passing of time, mankind will discover that they have to turn to poetry in order to interpret life and to console and sustain themselves, as science and philosophy will eventually prove flimsy and unstable. He demanded that poetry should serve a great purpose instead of becoming a mere medium of gaining pleasure and appreciating beauty. He claims that poetry is superior to philosophy, science, and religion because religion attaches its emotion to ideas, and ideas are infallible, and science, in his view, is incomplete without poetry. So here you see in these last two lines, if we just concentrate on these two lines, so the above discussion will be very clear to you. He claims that poetry is superior to philosophy in which way? Science is superior, poetry is excuse me, if you please just mute your microphones. So poetry is superior to philosophy, poetry is also superior to science, poetry is also superior to religion. In what ways? So he's saying that the religion attaches its emotion to ideas, and ideas are infallible. Emotions to ideas and ideas are infallible, and science, in his view, is incomplete without poetry. So you see, there was something emotional, and that will, in religion, and which will really confuse people. And also he's saying that science, it will remain incomplete if there is no poetry. So he's saying that science will fail, religion will fail, philosophy will also fail, but poetry, that will survive as a field of knowledge. Because he's very much ambitious, about the future of poetry. Now, one of the characteristic qualities of poetry mentioned by Arnold in this essay is a sound representation of life and ideas without any attempt to falsify the facts. That means the life that will be presented in the poetry, that will be very much sound. It will be complete. It will be untarnished, unblemished. So that is what is saying. That means it will be very much pure. And at the same time, the ideas that will be presented in the poetry, that will not falsify any facts. That means it will not present anything which is pretentious, which is fake. So poetry will not do that. So he further points out that another characteristic of great poetry is the application of ideas to criticism of life. So we'll also concentrate on this. That now he is saying that the poetry is a criticism of life. Now we'll skip some of the paragraphs from here since we don't have enough time. So I will just jump to page 6, and here I'll focus on the point charlatanism and the fallacies. Charlatanism, I have already told you that it means that something which is if something is fake or pretentious, then we call it charlatan. And the idea of this fake or this pretentious stuff, this thing, we call it charlatanism. That means something which is fake or pretentious, which is not true. Or we can say it's a kind of mimicry. It's a kind of caricature. And fallacies that means it is the plural form of fallacy, which means error, mistake. So one is fake and then the other one is mistake. So just for our understanding, we can take it in that way. So now he talked about the charlatanism and fallacies. So Arnold, after apathizing poetry in his essay, suggests that poetry must be of high order of excellence to fulfill its high destinies. Now here we see the word apotheosizing. That means he was lionizing, or you can say he was saying something big. He was expecting something big. Or you can say to put something in the place of a god. So he was saying that poetry is something which is a kind of god, you see. And after doing that, now he is saying that poetry, it has a higher purpose, and it has to fulfill this, to reach to the high destinies. Study of poetry clearly enunciates that the people must accustom themselves with high standards and strict judgments in order to avoid fallacies of highly regarding certain poems and poets. So you see, we have to maintain the high standards and we have to have strict judgments while actually we want to talk about or we want to write poetry. So poetry should not be valued on the basis of the value of certain poets in history. So we cannot take some poets as a as a yardstick or as parameters, and then we will say that this poet is, this contemporary poet, actually, he is not like that ancient poet, so that's why he is not qualified to call him, to be called him as a classic. So we cannot do that. It must not be evaluated on the basis of personal affinities or likings. That we have already explained it in the very first paragraph, that we call it, the personal fallacies, and another one is historical fallacies. So we cannot have this. Now, one interesting point that I would like to mention here, these personal affinities, these personal fallacies, this is also called affective fallacies. And New Critic, actually, New Critic, it's a different kind of literary movement. If you have any idea of the literary criticism, then you can find that there is a movement called New Criticism. So these New Critic people, they say that they actually coined this term, this affective fallacy. Affective fallacy means that a readers or a person who is reading the poem, his personal emotion or his personal likings or disliking must not be invested in to the criticism of the poem. That means when you read a poem, you must be very much objective. You cannot bring your personal feelings to analyze that particular piece of work. Okay, so this is the thing about, briefly we can talk about these Charles and classes. It seems we're running out of time, so I will jump to the main points. Now, in the second paragraph, he says, according to Arnold, there is no place for charlatanism in poetry. A charlatan is defined as a flamboyant deceiver who attracts others with tricks or jokes. So you see, he is a trickster. A charlatan is a trickster. He is a deceiver. So he says that in the poetry, actually, we cannot have this kind of deception. It must be very much genuine, authentic. So that's his idea. So that's why he's saying that there must not be any charlatanism in poetry, because charlatanism in poetry, that will confuse, or sometimes it removes the distinction between the excellent and inferior, sound and unsound, true and untrue, or only half true. Because if you try to deceive people, with the help of your poetry, then people might not get the real thing beneath the word that actually you are saying. So that's why he's saying that there must not be any kind of pretension while actually you write poetry, and also while actually you try to analyze poetry. Next, we'll jump to the next idea, that is poetry as a criticism of life. As he said, it is in page 8 of your handout. So in his essay, The Study of Poetry, McFarland has presented poetry as a criticism of life. In the beginning of his essay, he states, in poetry, as criticism of life, under conditions fixed for such criticism by the laws of poetic truth and poetic beauty, the spirit of a race will find, as time goes by and other helps fail, its consolation and stay. So you see, he's very much ambitious about the poetry, that poetry will stay. Other knowledge or other kinds of, like philosophy and science, they might fail, but poetry will stay there. And it will uplift the spirit of the race. That means we can sustain with the help of poetry. And also it will give us the poetic truth, and also it will talk about the poetic beauty. Thus, according to him, poetry is governed by the laws of poetic truth and poetic beauty. Now, about poetic truth, he says that it's a characteristic quality of the matter and substance of a poetry. It means a sound representation of life. So poetic truth means something which is universal, and something that is sound. That means sound representation of life means a true representation of life. That is poetic truth. In other words, it is a true depiction of life without any attempt to falsify the facts. That means there is no charlatanism in poetry. And poetic beauty is contained in the matter and style. So poetic beauty is the manner of style. It is the manner and the style of writing poetry. It is marked by excellence of verse. So poetic beauty springs from right words in the right order. So poetic beauty means the right words in the right order. So he's saying that if you really want to criticize life, then poetic truth and poetic beauty must be there in poetry. Then the next point, the Protestant method. With this, actually, I would like to conclude today's discussion. And after that, if you have time, I will open the floor for question, and then you can ask me if you have any confusion regarding this lecture. Now, the Protestant Method says that poetry is interpreted by having natural magic in it and moral profundity. So you see, interpreted by having natural magic in it and moral profundity. Arnold's Protestant Method is a comparative method of criticism. According to this method, in order to judge a poet's work properly, a critic should compare it to passages taken from works of great masters of poetry, and that these passages should be applied as touchstone to other poetry. Now, you see that this touchstone method, touchstone means, I hope that you understand what is touchstone. That means if you touch with the touchstone, that it can transform something else into something. For example, if I have a touchstone, then with the help of that touchstone, I can transform iron into gold. So that is the touchstone. So if you understand this, then also understand this, that we can take some good passages, even a single line, from a very famous and established writer. He might be an ancient or a contemporary, doesn't matter. Then we can take those lines, and then we can put some other write-ups, and then we can compare. Because the established paragraph or the established passages, which is regarded as a very good one, an authentic piece, so we can use it as a parameter, and the writing we are comparing with that thing. So we can put these two, like X is the touchstone and Y is the writing. For example, my writing. So I can put my writing, and then I will check that whether it goes or whether it matches with the quality. Of the writing that I'm trying to match it with. That means a touchstone, the writing that I'm using as a touchstone. If it matches, then it's good. Then we can call it that it's a good writing. If it doesn't match, then we can say that it's not of good quality. So that is the basic idea of the touchstone. So I hope that I could explain it more. If it is needed, then we can have another session on it later on. So I'd like to conclude my today's lecture with this touchstone method from Arnold's The Study of Poetry. So if you have any question, you can ask me now. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so do you have any question?
No, sir, I don't have any.
Okay, these are the main important issues actually from his, this text. So if you just concentrate on these things, then you will be able to answer, most of the questions, in your exam, if there is any from this text. And also he talked about on Chaucer, also he talked about Dryden, all these poems. Also he talked about Thomas Gray and Milton, and he also left some comments on Burns. And then he, you see, he tried to, why actually we're calling it practical? Yes, because actually he gave examples. He took examples from the write-ups of all these poets, and then he analyzed them. So that's actually we are calling it, it's a very kind of practical criticism, because practically he's showing the techniques, or he's criticizing all these poets. He's not only presenting theory, also he's applying those theories or those critical norms or rubrics to analyze the works of these famous poets. So that's why we are calling it, it's a very practical criticism or practical work, this study of poetry. Okay, so anything more? Anything you'd like to ask? Or if you have any comment, you can also have any comment if you have any. Any comment?
No, sir.
Okay, if that is so, then I would like to conclude it here. I just want to call it a day, and I'd like to thank you again for your cooperation, and hope to see you. I hope to talk to you in another session, inshallah, in the future. So thank you very much, and stay safe and stay well. Take care of yourself.
Sir.
Yes. Yes, please.
একটা রিকোয়েস্ট ছিল, যে আমরা আমাদের শাহনাজ ম্যাম বাকি স্যারেরা তারা অন্য ওই মেসেঞ্জার একটা এসএমএস চ্যাটিং এর মাধ্যমে আমাদের ক্লাসটা করাচ্ছেন। তো সবাই আমরা জুম অ্যাপসটা ব্যবহার করে কিন্তু সব থেকে আমাদের যে লাভবান হচ্ছে বলে মনে করি আর কি। সবাই চাচ্ছে যে এভাবেই আমরা ক্লাসটা করি। তো আমি আপনার মাধ্যমে আর কি টিচারদের কাছে বলতে চাচ্ছি যে যেন সবাই ওই অ্যাপসটার মাধ্যমে আমাদের ক্লাসটা নেয় আর কি।
Okay, no problem. You can talk to the head of the department. At the same time, I will also convey the message to the department and also the dean, also our dean madam. So So let's see.
Thank you,
say
sir.
about it. Okay? Thank you very much. Thanks for your opinion and thanks for the
Thank you,
cooperation.
sir.
Okay, talk to you next time, inshallah. Take care. Bye.
Inshallah.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Allah.